Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. I'm here this morning to talk about everything we learned from Arsenal 1, Manchester City 1. Okay, so as everyone has realised, this is a very unorthodox sort of game in totality between Arsenal and Manchester City. One that we're often here talking about Arsenal maybe playing as City did. So 32.8% possession for Pep Guardiola's team against Arsenal yesterday, and that is the lowest that a Pep Guardiola team has managed in the top flight. So it's definitely something that I want to touch on, and we're gonna cover everything in this video. I'm gonna try and basically go into everything, but in this situation, this is what Manchester City was sort of doing in their deep build-up. Now, Gigi Donnarumma is a player who, when he was signed, was a little bit speculative because he wasn't the traditional ball-playing keeper. Now, one thing he does actually have on his side is the ability to play long, direct, clean balls. And I think we often talk about sort of managers playing towards their characteristics of their players. And I don't think you could probably pick a better sort of use of the term than this game against Arsenal, where Pep Guardiola pretty much went directly into Haaland with every sort of deep phase build-up. Now, obviously, that earned them the goal, and then obviously it actually earned them the second chance, which Haaland probably should have squared over here to, I think it was Phil Foden arriving in the second half. But it was a very, very different performance, and I am going to cover sort of why Manchester City went to a back five later in the video, but I really want to start on what Arsenal were trying to do. So if we take this back into what Arsenal were trying to do on the ball in deep build-up, and to be honest, I thought Arsenal actually... The thing is with Arsenal at the moment is like we cannot praise them for having the ball anymore. They're an elite team. We have to be praising them for sort of creating multiple chances, blowing teams out the water. And I think in a game against Manchester City, this was a game where Arsenal sort of had to put their impetus on it and they had to go and win it. And I think personally, the problems straight away were in the lineup for me. I didn't really like the inclusion of Mikel Merino as a right central midfielder in this game. And I'll go on to speak about sort of what Trossard was doing and why that could have been a different personnel that was better. But I think just overall in the lineup, there was a lot of sort of ums and ahs with the Arsenal fans before the game even kicked off, because they were looking at it going, how are we going to dominate Manchester City with that midfield? The funny thing is they actually did start to dominate with the ball against City. So we push this on into sort of what Manchester City were doing. Bernardo Silva was actually pressing up top with Erling Haaland back in a 4-4-2. And this was something we've not really seen from City this season. They've been pressing very, very efficiently in a 4-1-4-1 and having Haaland just lead all the press. But what was actually happening here is we can see, if we just shift over sort of Mikel Merino to this right half space, that was dragging out Josko Gvardiol into this pocket. And now Victor Gyökeres was standing 1v1 with Ruben Diaz. And then sort of in the game, what we was actually seeing was, with these two being very, very deep, it was enticing sort of Rodri and Teji Reinders and Phil Foden actually on this side. But that was meaning that Trossard was trying to come into these pockets and sort of play as the extra man. And that was asking the question of, obviously, Kusanov and then eventually Mateus Nunes to actually come into here. And then, as natural as it is for Arsenal, the fullbacks can then bomb on into these spaces. If Gyökeres pulls out here, we can make these sort of in darts. Ricardo Calafiori actually had the most touches in the opposition's box in this game against Manchester City for Arsenal. So I think that's kind of showing what Arsenal are trying to do with their overall sort of game plan. Now, the thing for me was, not in this situation. In this situation, I thought it was decent. Maybe Mikel Merino's not sort of a player who's going to take it on his back here and swivel inside. But when Manchester City sat deeper, which is often what we saw, they sat very, very deep. And I'm going to throw up some stats for you on the screen to show you what Manchester City's per game numbers look like in this game in comparison to sort of Pep Guardiola's tenure at Manchester City. And what we can see on there is open play passing sequences consisting of 10 plus passes. In this game was only 3 compared to their average at Manchester City for 19.9. Their direct speed was also up by 0.3 metres per second, which in that metric is massive. Passes per sequence is almost halved. Average sequence time, almost half. And passes per defensive action is way up, meaning they're not actually pressing the ball as reliably as we know a Manchester City team under Pep to do. So if we just take this back, so this is somewhat what Arsenal were looking to do. They were looking to have a flat line with a back three And Bernardo Silva was actually sort of dropping into these areas when it comes to in a full deep block. So Bernardo Silva was going here. And what this means is obviously City are now defending in that 4-5-1 that we've seen them do a lot this season. But sort of in a Unai Emery Simeone way, Pep Guardiola was sort of tasking the deep block to do this, which is making a back five when you're against your 1v1s. And I think Jeremy Doku and Phil Foden in particular in this game, and I must touch on Jeremy Doku because I thought he was one of the best players in this game for both teams. So his work rate to be here, to lead transitions, to get back, play 2v1 against his man was very, very good. And another thing is, I think Pep Guardiola actually noticed their lineup, and what Arsenal have been doing recently is Jurriën Timber is very much more deep than Ricardo Calafiori. So what it means is when Phil Foden is down here, he's man-marking Calafiori. But with Jeremy Doku, he's sat all the way up here, and it makes this somewhat lopsided defensive shape. And what that means, obviously, is if Manchester City win the ball in these areas, straight away you've got Erling Haaland sort of 1v1 here, Gabriel's covering all the space in behind Calafiori, and Jeremy Doku's 1v1 with Jurriën Timber. And I think that's where Manchester City was sort of looking to get the majority of their success, and they actually ended up getting some of that success in, you know, the goal they scored, and then the chance very, very late on into the game where I think Haaland probably should have squared it to Phil Foden, but he actually hit quite a tame shot. But I think a lot of people have obviously looked at this game and criticised. People have been criticising mainly Arsenal. I don't really agree with that. I think the only thing you can criticise Arsenal for, and I think Jamie Carragher actually said it on Sky Sports, was sort of the intent in the lineup. I think their actual performance, circulating around the box, pressing, probing, I think all of that, you cannot really ask much more from a manager standpoint. The only thing that I was concerned with is when they're in these positions, is Trossard, Calafiori, Marino the best personnel for these situations between the lines? And it's not a surprise we've seen sort of a different Arsenal in between the lines when Eberechi Eze come on. I think he's just a player who's naturally more suited to play in between the lines. And that's where, for me, Arsenal are probably thinking a little bit too much about the opposition. We're speaking about Pep adapting to his opposition, but Pep also said after the game that this is a team who are better than Manchester City. That's what he said in his own words. They played this way because they were better. I think Mikel Arteta went into the game with that mindset of to be where we might be second best in this game. How do we sort of overcome that? By getting, you know, the big lads in midfield, by winning the knockdowns, by putting the trusty lads in like Trossard. I just think if there was a 1-2 change, and Osaka was very much injured, but if there was just a 1 or 2 personnel changes, I think in the first 45 minutes, you could have started building that momentum so much earlier on, even if you were 1-0 down. And I think it was just one of them from me where I was looking at going, can we just be a little bit more on the front foot? We're at home. Can we get the best personnel out there? Can we get the personnel who, if City do sit deep, are going to create something out of nothing? I don't think Mikel Marino, Trossard are them players for me, especially when you've got players like Eberechi Eze, and I must credit Gabriel Martinelli, who come off for the second game in a row to score the equalizer in this game, and obviously the first goal that put them ahead against Bilbao away. So, yeah, I am going to sort of move on now into the general thing about Manchester City moving into a back five and why that happened. If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. So moving on into everything that Manchester City changed, and more so why they did change that. So I've got some records that were set in this game by Manchester City, and not in a good way. Well, it depends how you look at it, really. But obviously, it's the lowest percent possession in a single match under Guardiola. It's the fewest passes attempted. It's the most clearances made by a Guardiola team, and the second most clearances made by a Guardiola team. This one was 60, was 37 at Wolves away, I think, in 22-23. So we're talking about a massive jump there. It's the fewest shots attempted in a single match since December 23, and the fewest touches in the opposition's box in a single match since the start of last season, with only 8 touches in the opposition's box. Now, I want to just show you what they were trying to do. So they finished the game with a back line of Ake, Gvardiol, Stones, Nunes, with Rodri, Nico Gonzalez in front, Bernardo, Teji Reinders on the side with Savinho, and obviously they took Haaland off after 75 minutes. Now, Pep Guardiola was somewhat blaming the workload on his players as to be like a scheduling problem because these players were, playing too many minutes. Now, in defence of him, this was only the second time under Pep Guardiola at Manchester City he's played the same lineup in 3 back-to-back games. It's never happened apart from once before this. So I do sort of understand that, but in the same way, this was something that I've never really seen from a Pep Guardiola team. Subbing off the centre forward, putting on a Savinho, and then putting on an extra defender. And they were defending in a 5-4-1. And that, for me, is something that we've never, ever seen from Guardiola. And even when we was in the 5-4-1 with City, when they got the extra body on the outside, because Arsenal went a bit adventurous and started to throw the kitchen sink at it, this was happening. And they were creating a back six. And it's something that was almost revolutionary from a Pep Guardiola team, maybe in a good or a bad way, depending on how you look at it. But I think the main thing is for me here is obviously Manchester City didn't really have too many attacking subs off the bench, so I think they were looking at how do we get a point here. And even up until Arsenal scored, Manchester City had 0.89 expected goals from their 5 shots. Arsenal had 0.96 from 12 shots. So in some regards, it was actually working for Pep Guardiola all the way up until they started to push high. And I actually found the goal to be very, very, very interesting. I mean, we're talking about a Manchester City team who's playing 5 at the back. We're talking about them trying to defend the lead. And what do? Well, they press up in sort of this situation. They lose the ball in the opposition's half. And then the back 5, for some reason, plays this wild offside trap near the edge of their own box. Actually, I think it's down here. And Gabriel Martinelli makes this curved run in front of Nathan Ake down the side like this. And I think Emirates actually plays this lovely clipped ball again from the centre. As we were saying, I think he's definitely a player who needs to play in the centre moving forward, because as we covered in his game, you can play left wing, you can come inside off the left wing with Calafiori overlapping, but in the heart of it is where we want Eze to be. That's where his best work takes place, and we want to put him there as much as he can be there throughout the entire game. And I just thought it was incredibly interesting how Manchester City didn't decide to drop off. Now, I'm not asking City to play on the edge of the box, but I'm asking, can we actually track the runners? It felt like they were trying to play an offside trap just simply because of the body language of these players when the ball was played in behind. There wasn't these massive retreating runs from Nathan Ake. It was almost like curving the bodies to try and catch him off. And then when Martinelli gets in, Donnarumma's a couple metres off his line, because that's a very poor error from Donnarumma. I don't know where he's going on this goal. But this run has to be tracked. City have to know that in the last 5 minutes, they cannot afford to play that high on the edge of their own box when they've got a player like Emirates in these deeper midfield and Martinelli sort of making these spins inside. So, yeah, it was a very, very interesting game from Manchester City's point of view, and I think it's something that we've never seen before, and I'm really interested to see where this leaves Pep Guardiola, because I was thinking in this 5-4-1, it's a shape that, we're not familiar with him. We're familiar with sort of Oliver Glasner in this 5-4-1, and I thought the way they finished the game, they had 5 defenders on, they had two centre defensive midfielders on either side of them. They had 2 centre midfielders, and then we had a winger up front. And I don't doubt it was because obviously a lack of quality off the bench for attacking changes. I think Savinho was probably the only player who could have done that. But yeah, very, very interesting one, and. Yeah, it's going to be weird to see how people feel about that, because I'm sure from a Manchester City point of view, they'll be saying it almost worked, but it did feel like they were playing as the inferior team, which is not something we associate with Manchester City. So, yeah, I think this is going to be... It's an opportunity missed for Arsenal. I think after going to Anfield, losing the game by a marginal free kick, obviously, but then going at home against Manchester City, I think a win here would have put them right back on track, and there's a lot of time to make up the spaces in the league, but this was one where I was looking at Arsenal to be like, you probably should be winning this game. You are the better team, you're at home, and I think the lineup and sort of the general storyline of the game up until the last sort of half an hour when they did start to proper push was a very, very iffy one. But yeah, I'm going to move on into the final section now of everything we learned. As we mentioned at the top of this video, this is obviously the lowest possession that a Pep Guardiola team has had in the history of Pep Guardiola managing. Now, I want to show you that Manchester City's lowest possession games under Pep Guardiola. I'm going to run through them one by one and maybe give you a little bit of rationale as to why Pep actually believed that his City team could do this. So, obviously, this is the with 32.8% possession, and they drew this game. But if we go on from there, they had Arsenal next, they won that, and then the next two they lost against Brighton and Wolves. But then after that, they won every single game, even with less possession, and the least possession sort of in Pep Guardiola's reign. They beat Liverpool, Spurs, United, Chelsea, Leicester, Spurs again, all with less than 47% possession. And these are some of the lowest games with Pep Guardiola at Manchester City with the least amount of the ball. So I think maybe this is something that they've looked at and gone, can Manchester City now be this team that uses Haaland as this out ball and gets these runners off him in Jeremy Doku and stuff like that? But it did feel like they were clinging on towards the end. I mean, it's a bit of an extreme. This is the lowest they've had of the ball by like 4%. And it's a big, big jump to go from that to that. So I do understand the rationale behind it from Pep Guardiola, and obviously it almost worked, and I think they were loving it. But I think Pep Guardiola was almost playing for a point in the game. And I just think for Arsenal, they needed to have been a little bit more adventurous. They had to have took the advantage of this game. We're looking at a team now who's pushing for the title, and we've all considered, Manchester City, Liverpool, who've been going for them titles. They all win their games at home. They all win their games against the big six at home, and that is not what Arsenal did in this game. And I think it was, especially after the game at Anfield, I thought this was a really good time for them to kick on, but they got the goal in the end, and it was obviously a wonderfully taken goal by Gabriel Martinelli. But I just thought, I thought that the lineup just didn't really put much confidence into the team that this was a team that could go and blow Manchester City out the water. So obviously this is a problem that we've been speaking about with Arsenal for ages. But I just want to throw this on the screen for you now and talk about their XG from open play. So we mentioned this in the Gyökeres piece, but Arsenal this season have got 3.1 XG from open play. Now, I'm not saying that set pieces don't count, and I'm not saying that set pieces should be discarded. They're a massive part of the game. But Arsenal this season have only created 0.3 more expected goals from open play than Burnley, who have just come up from the Championship, and Aston Villa, who have just scored their first Premier League goal against Sunderland at the weekend against 10 men. That is not a good sign. Whichever way you look at it, right? The corners, the free kicks, the dead balls, all of that, that's great, fine margins. The majority of the game is played in open play. And if you're creating 3.1 XG from open play in your first 5 Premier League games, albeit you have played Manchester United, Liverpool and City, very, very tough start to the season, with 2 of them being away, there needs to be more from a title chaser. City have got 8.2, Liverpool have got 4.7, even Chelsea have got 4.5, Tottenham 4.5. They've created less open play XG than Everton, Wolves, Fulham, 0.1 more than Newcastle, 0.2 more than West Ham. These are very, very bad teams in open play at the moment who are struggling to create chances. And I think, for me, the majority of that open play XG has to come from sort of that risk-averse nature. With the amount of times we have to talk about it with Arsenal, I'm sure they're sick of it. But again, I think that comes from sort of the selection in the team. Can we get Eze in there, who's a little bit more X-factor, shot off the cuff, across from nowhere? Can we get more of these? Trossard's a brilliant player, very, very great player. I think he's a really good technical in-penalty box shooter. Is that really what Arsenal wanted for this game? Could they have done with someone who's a bit more of a 1v1 specialist who could take advantage of maybe Kusanov or whip a ball into Gyökeres? And, the question with Arsenal for the past few years has always been about the centre forward. And the centre forward has scored a couple goals in the Premier League and he's doing okay. In these bigger games, he is getting no service. And it doesn't matter who plays there. We've seen it with Kai Havertz. These numbers are not a new thing. But there has to be an emphasis of, can we get the ball into the centre forward? Can we create chances from nothing? And I think the best teams in the world currently are doing that. So, I've got another stat just to throw up here. Expected goals in open play. United, they had 0.28. Leeds, they had 0.96. Liverpool, they had 0.3. Nottingham Forest is the only game out of the 5 they actually had over 1, which is 1.01. And then 0.57 against Manchester City. And to actually add to that, I've got Arsenal's final third passes. They had 189 final third passes in this game against Manchester City with a 78% success rate. City only had 88, so well more than double. The amount of time and space and opportunity and territory you've got in that final third has to result in chances. It has to come. And I think whether or not it's the personnel, but you can't even talk about the personnel anymore because of the amount of players they've now signed. There has to be something that links together everything for Arsenal in that final third, especially when they're sort of pinned in, when they're pinning in an opposition team. And I think against some of the bigger oppositions, I think this is one where City looked at it and went, can you break us down? If we give you the ball on the edge of the box, can you factor or can you, make any chances to cause our centre-halves problems? And I think that's why Pep Guardiola ended up going to 5 defenders. I think at one point, 8 of the 11 players, well, 9 including the keeper, were over 6 foot in the game. So they were challenging them. If we put a ball into the box, how are you going to get on the end of that? And I think that was a massive thing in the game for Arsenal. So yeah, I think moving forward for Arsenal, they've got to get more chances for the centre forward. Victor Gyökeres is a player who's cultured in goal scoring, and whether or not you don't like him against the deep block, whether or not he needs space, the guy can finish and the guy can strike a ball. So I think moving forward, they've got to facet more chances from open play against the better oppositions. Like we just said there, 0.28 against United, 0.57 against City, 0.3 against Liverpool from open play. Not good enough at the moment, but I've been really optimistic about Arsenal this season. I think they've looked great. I think Manchester City have done something completely different, but they got a point out of the game, and I think it says a lot how Manchester City fans are happy with that point going to Arsenal. Speak to a lot of them, they're like, good point. And Arsenal fans should be looking at that going, that's 2 points dropped, because, well, it is for them at this stage. So, yeah. Let us know what you've made of the game between Arsenal and Manchester City that finished 1 each, and we'll catch you next time on the overlap breakdown. So please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel. Thank you.